evening, everyone. Hi, I'm Lisa Ling. What'd you think? I have the same feeling. I am so honored to be here tonight to moderate this conversation with these titans of film, especially because I actually spent some time myself in Oklahoma, in Pahuska, where the Osage Nation is, and I don't know about you, but when I read the book and spent time there, I just felt so angry that this aspect of American history was never included in my history books. And that goes for so many stories these days, which is why this reckoning that's happening, I think, has been so enlightening and important. And so I'm so thrilled to have been able to experience what I did in Osage Nation and to see the story of the Osage people and the Osage murders come alive in such a beautiful but also respectful and complex way is really, it has been such a moving experience. And so without further ado, I know it's been a long night, I want to introduce the incredible stars of Killers of the Flower Moon, starting with the incomparable Robert De Niro. The incredible Lily Gladstone. The one and only Leonardo DiCaprio, everyone. And director extraordinary Martin Scorsese. Welcome. So before we get into the film, I understand that Martin, Leo, and Robert, this is the first time that the three of you have collaborated together on a project. What was it like, and was there anything surprising that you'd like to share about the experience? Robert, I'll just start with you.
Well,
You have a microphone. Yep.
well, Leo joked that we sort of continued the relationship we had with this boy's life. But it was good finally to be able to work together, Marty, Leo, and myself, after all these years. And that's it.
Leo, how about you? What was it like to work with this trifecta?
It frankly meant a great deal to me. You know, my career started, and I'll say it as many times as I can, with this man to my left here believing in me and helped task me and chose me for my first starring role in feature films in this boy's life. We got to do it, another film together, but I don't believe we had any scenes together in Marvin's room.
Yeah.
But it was literally 30 years later that, after Bob mentioning to Marty, you should check this kid out, when I was 16 years old, I got to do so many incredible films with Marty now, and they've, in a lot of ways, both been mentors and, cinematic father figures to me, and to have this great concentric circle, 30 years later with both of them meant a lot. And one of the moments, and I've said this before, that I really remember was us working on the final sequence to our relationship, to Ernest's relationship with Hale. And we spent many, many weekends, weekend after weekend after weekend, and it was so amazing to watch both their process and all of us together. We kept talking it out, because I think the original script had this really sort of electrifying attack from Ernest, and we kept on saying, wait, no, there is kind of a love there. He is a father figure to him, and this is this moment of reckoning between them. And to just watch both of them distill that scene more and more and more down to the truth of what these two people would be, was one of the most memorable sort of collaborations that I think the three of us had, and I'm very proud of that scene. So.
But that was the jail sequence at the end. The two of them confront him. Yeah, that was something that came out of Bob and I since 1972, whatever, together, and even earlier, of course. But so the odd thing for me is that you introduced me to Leo, and then something happened. There was this flurry of like 20 years, and it was all these movies and people, and it's almost as if we had already, all three of us have been acting together in a way. So when it all slipped into this business of whether it was Irishman first or Kills in the Flower Moon first, somehow it all seemed very natural. That the three of us suddenly looked around and realized, oh, the three of us are together. Really. And it's always been that way because of events and things that we've been hanging around and that sort of thing. And also the flurry of the years is odd because at our age now, Bob and I at least, it seems like some sort of a train ride or something. It just keeps going, and suddenly you look back and 25, 30 years have gone by, and there's been a constant, and that's Bob and Leo also for me. So for us to be on the set together, it was very natural, very natural.
And Lily, you received this arousing applause because you were just sensational in this film. What was it like for you to work alongside these titans of film? What was that like for you? Who have had this long-standing relationship with one another for so many years?
I mean, I just had the best seat in the house for this collaboration, honestly. When I stopped pinching myself, which I still am, it's such a gift as the new kid in this dynamic to walk into something that's so established and is so, established between these three and these two particularly, which has kind of established cinema for my generation. I think for a lot of us in here. So I kind of found that it was something I couldn't think about too much. There were a couple of moments where, I don't know, when we started working together and finding our dynamic, where you would kind of tease me about the reality of my situation amongst you three, and I'd be like, shut up, I can't think about that.
We're uncomfortable.
Exactly. But yeah, I was end of week one. First scene with both of them, my hands were just completely shaking, and I thought it was good, and then I got in front of Bob, and it was just not good. But then it was fine. At a certain point, you just kind of sober up and realize that you're all here to tell a story you all tremendously care about, and to be too meek about it, or too humble about it, or too intimidated by it, I guess, is doing a disservice to these titans, who are all just incredible human beings, and so committed to a story that generations of film have been marginalizing, putting out of focus, putting in the sidelines. And they all were so open, and it wasn't just like, having a seat at the table for me. It was like, what are you bringing to dinner? So I didn't have a lot of time. I had 3 months before I ever got there to try to not be in my head too much about it. But.
Well, certainly a testament to your acting abilities, because your performance was just absolutely effortless. Absolutely effortless. Martin, you are one of the most storied directors in Hollywood, and you have taken us to explore the depths of so many aspects of American culture. Why did you have to tell the story of the Osage and the Osage murders right now? Why were you so compelled to tell this story?
I think a great part of it has been the grace of time that I've had over the years. I don't know if I knew this was exactly the right time to tell it. It just seemed to all come together this way at this time. But it did start with me back in a project I was involved with for a few months back in '74. I found myself on a Pine Ridge Reservation, Lakota Sioux, and I was only 30 years old. I didn't quite, I made Mean Streets, and I was still making Alice Doesn't Live Here anymore, actually, while I was there. And so I was, my naivete and ignorance of what I encountered was so traumatic to me. I can't categorize what it was. You can't say, oh, this is what's happened to these people. There's no category for it. And so it just awakened me in a way. I was never a person to suddenly make films that were, headlines of the time that could be of a time and place really important and then forgotten about 2 years later. I just never made that kind of film. So I didn't know how. I just sensed that somehow I need to get myself involved in a situation where I could express what I felt when I was there at Pine Ridge, and for the indigenous, and for ourselves too, the white European. And so it took many years, and I became involved with a number of people, one of them being Robbie Robertson, who was the First Nations, half Mohawk, and beginning to understand more and more about indigenous and the music too. The music, so much of rock and roll comes from Native American. Link Ray, Rumble, all these, all this incredible stuff. They made that film Rumble, about rock and roll coming from Native American. But in any event, ultimately, by the time I received, I think through you, Leo, the book, David Grant's book, Kills the Flower Moon, my first reaction was, this has got to be right. Now, I don't know if I'm going to get it right, but what I'm saying is that we've got to be very careful when we deal with the indigenous here, that, we're doing it not just for authenticity. Authenticity is going to be hard enough, but there's got to be a truth we have to find here, and I kept thinking about it, giving it up, thinking about it, giving it up. We're making Irishmen, and that, in a way, made me see things differently. And by that point in time, there was a long period of gestation because of Irishmen, which took a year and 3/4 to make, and then COVID. And there was that forced solitude in which we're trying to come to terms with the script. Eric Roth, myself, and a number of friends of mine were all, there through Zooms and telephone calls and things like that. And bottom line is that what I found as the core of the story was that night in Osage country, where right before COVID hit, I had the chance to visit twice Oklahoma. And second visit, there was a dinner at Grey Horse, 250 at the Osage. And that night is when I understood that we have to go deeper, because that night I saw the face. I saw the face of the Osage. They had faces, they had voices. And I was wondering, saying to myself, who are they? I could figure out the FBI guys. I could figure out who were they. And that night I found out. And then I realized, we have a story here that's about love and betrayal, trust and betrayal, but truly a love story. And how do we do that? And it took another 1.5 years, I think, before we started shooting. We had that COVID period to work it out. So those are the elements that came together.
Yeah, I know those faces. They're faces of people who, even after a century, are still reeling from these murders. And you mentioned having to get it right. Tell me about, all of you, the responsibility that you carried to ensure that you told this story right. And how often did you reflect on those faces who, again, are still living with the grief today.
And thank you so much for your special on CNN, Lisa. That meant so much to so many people. If you haven't watched it, she did a special about the Reign of Terror, and spoke to a lot of the people who were very seminal in shaping how we went about things.
Talk about that broad responsibility that you carried, and how different was that from things that you had experienced on other films?
I mean, I guess I'll just keep going. Not being Osage, but being Native, being Blackfeet and Nez Perce. Every tribal nation in this country has some history with exploitation of resource, and history being a modern thing, it's shaped, the study of history is understanding our present, and it's shaped who we are and everything that we do. And I was so grateful to learn when I was auditioning that they were doing a locals casting first, and that there were so many Osages playing these historical members of their own nation. It was, I knew that walking in, having grown up in a place that was of high interest for a lot of films, my reservation is very close to Glacier National Park, so we get movies once in a great while, and sometimes sets come in and they're great, it's, they're always, the community always remembers the stories of the film being there and the people working on it. Sometimes it's not always the best film or not always the most respectful to community, so I knew going in I would have to conduct myself, because I'm not Osage, as an outsider, but as a Native person who understands that, the way I was raised, to listen, to not speak first, to bring gifts, because people are giving you their stories and their times, so you thank them for that. And to really just try to handle it the way I would expect somebody who was playing a Blackfeet character on my reservation talking about the Baker's Massacre, to conduct themselves. And really what was so lovely, because I had nerves as a Native actor walking into this level of a project. Hollywood doesn't have the greatest history. I mean, I knew my introduction to Marty as a filmmaker was Kundun, so I knew that he knew how to get inside and do it in a very humane, beautiful, challenging way. So I had faith that it would work out, but there was some terror there. But it just, every step of the way, I mean, production was out there so long in advance and developing relationships with communities, so by the time the actors got there, Leo and I had meetings set up with people, and we just went to listen. And every little bit, it wasn't just the preliminary pre-production too, it was throughout. It was, if something wasn't right, or if Marty heard a story that fit thematically and historically and just was a very human element, those pages got scrapped, they got replaced. Yancey Redcorn, his audition, I believe, he went off book and improvised, and exactly, yeah, his improvisation is what you see in the film. I fought at the Boxer Rebellion and I could see my enemy. And it's like, if I knew who my enemy was, I would kill him. That was all Yancey's improv from his audition. Everett Waller, when he's speaking about Osages, when they die by the enemy, don't let them die alone. Rousing as Assistant Chief Paul Redigal, who Everett Waller's very familiar with. I mean, Everett had started that just to get reaction shots from everybody in the roundhouse, and then Marty's like, no, put the camera on him and just let him keep going. It's kind of funny, because I mean, Everett's just known for being like that in the community, so everybody's like, yeah, it makes sense, Everett's just being Everett. But everything that he said was in the moment, improv, because he knows this history, he teaches it to the younger generation. So it was really refreshing as a Native actor to get to just be an actor. A lot of times when you're on, and that's how it was so different for me, a lot of times when you're Native, you're not playing your own nation. There's 574 federally recognized tribes and several other hundred that are not. You oftentimes are one of the only voices, if not the only one, and then you're playing researcher, you're helping with props, you're like explaining that no, I don't speak this language. I barely speak my own language. It's like I'm not going to just come in and know how to say these things. It's been a varied experience being a native actor, but in this case, I got to just be an actor because Osage were carrying this, and I listened. I committed so much to learning language. We all did. I mean, everybody talks about how Bob speaks incredible Osage. It's perfect.
Well, I want to talk about that because there is this effort underway to teach kids the Osage language because it's a language that is in danger of going extinct, yet there's so much of the Osage language spoken in this film. How did that come about? And Bob, what did it feel like to speak Osage? What did it feel like for all of you to speak Osage?
Well, it was, I had no idea how the language would sound or anything. I just knew it would be, whatever it would be not something totally alien to me. And so I started learning it with this young man, Chris, who was terrific. And I just practiced a lot because I did not want to, I wanted it to be so second nature. And all it was just a lot of practice. Period. It was that simple.
Chris just adores you.
Huh?
Chris adores you.
Huh?
Your language teacher, Chris, he adores you. He really appreciates you.
Oh, he was great.
It's probably pretty exciting for him to say that I taught Bob De Niro how to speak Osage.
Oh yeah, he reminds you constantly. We're still friends.
The thing is, we had discovered that Ernest Burkhart, the real Ernest that Leo's character is based upon, did speak Osage. And I said, he had a fascination with the Osage. He was so remember we talked about doing this, and he had to learn it. Whole scenes in Osage.
Well, how did it feel, Leo, to speak Osage?
It was interesting because a lot of, the connection that Molly and Ernest have is that he starts to learn about the culture, But it was always tricky with my character because from the onset of doing this film, here we were, a century later telling the story, a century later after the Tulsa massacre, a century later after one of the first murders, and we started to immerse ourselves in Oklahoma, started to listen to the Osage community, and there's a lot of mixed views about Ernest, and Ernest, was obviously a bit of a chameleon, but one of the things he did do was start to learn, almost like a historian himself, about the history of the Osage Nation, and started to learn the language. Now, was this a manipulation tactic? Was it not? These are things that as we were filming, we were trying to piece together, because at one time this was somewhat of a FBI murder mystery, and we had to sort of decompress all that and bring it back down towards an organic love story. But I think
Can you elaborate a little bit more on that, Leo? Because the film that you all saw is very different from the original version of it. I mean, the original version was more of like a kind of a crime drama, right? That centered on law enforcement and the evolution of the antagonist.
And that night in Grey Horse, when they talked about, Margie Burkhart got up and talked about, remember that Ernest and Molly were in love, and suddenly hit me, and I realized I think we may be we're coming at the story maybe in the wrong way. I don't know how to go yet. I didn't know, and then COVID hit, and you came to me right before COVID hit, and you said, I think, where's the heart of the story? I said, the heart seems to be with Molly and Ernest. I said, well, why don't I play Ernest? You said, okay. Yeah, because we tried everything else, and it's good and everything, but we've seen it before. I mean, as a film, I'm talking about. And also, it seems to be from the outside in. But here was the inside. But now we got to get inside. Now, how do we do that? Okay, so we start working on the script, and COVID hit. And all through that COVID period is where it all changed and developed in terms of Ernest and Molly, in terms of Bob's character, King of the Osage Hills. That kind of sustained all the way through until the jail scene, I think. You know, we kept working on that. Or even in the, also the paddling scene too, that we kept working on. But at least he knew Bob had a character who was going. But here we had to sort of start from, we had to go right to the heart of things, and that actually didn't finish until the day we finished shooting.
I mean, what an astounding, confounding character Ernest Burkhart was. And, you know, there's debate about whether he really did love Molly. I mean, based on the research that you did and the interactions that you had with their descendants, do you believe that he really loved Molly?
I listened to what the Osage community told me, and a multitude of them came up to me and said, remember this, that was a real marriage. He really loved her. It's shocking because you read the book, how could, you know, somebody that is so filled with deception and could do this to his own family really love this person? And it brought us on this journey to creating an unreliable protagonist wherein we didn't even know how complicit he was while we were filming, you know, how much information he knew, what he was withholding from her. We kept, you know, developing this relationship as it went on, and it became more and more powerful. And I think the connection between the both of us became more and more powerful. You know, like I said, I got to speak to direct descendants of my character, you know, the niece of Ernest Burkhart, who was, you know, a 13-year-old inquisitive young girl who wanted to ask her uncle about the murders, and waited till Christmas time when he was drunk and got him to admit certain things to her. I mean, this story is so sensitive, it is so fresh, and it still affects generations of people in that place. And it's amazing to have gone to a location where it's such a raw nerve still, and you can talk to people that are still on those lands, that are the direct relatives that are still affected by what happened.
After he was pardoned, he was sentenced to life, and then he was pardoned and went back to live among the Osage. I mean, it is...
You know, people remember him showing up. Like, he passed away in 1986, same year I was born. So there's people that we talked to who remembered him, and they said he'd come to community doings and sit in the back. Like, he'd very quiet, didn't interact with people really, but he kept showing up and just would be there. I think he really found a home. And you know, Margie, who we talked to, her father was Cowboy, the son, and she told us that Cowboy, who was known in the community as being very fun-loving, larger than life. So was Lizzie. They loved throwing parties. We found that as evidence that they had a happy childhood. So their family must have been very fun-loving, because that was kind of our job. What was it like behind closed doors? And Cowboy maintained a relationship with his dad. He'd be with people at a party, hanging out with everybody, and he would kind of get somber and like just ironically say, like, you know, excuse me, I gotta go pick up dynamite. That was the nickname he gave his dad. At some point, I think they drifted apart, but it took a long time. It's, you know, after there was, it's still baffling, but there was love in this family, you know.
One of the things that was wild to me when I was there was so many of the Osage didn't even become aware of these murders until David Grant's book came out. And there were only these prosecutions. There were hundreds of Osage who were murdered during the Reign of Terror. But yet we only know of these two. Mark, tell us about how closely you worked with the Osage community. And for all of you, were there scenes that may have changed because members of the Osage had issues or
issues? Yeah, like Wilson Pipestem was kind of being very forceful with me when I first met him. He said, you don't understand certain things. You understand that Bill Hale, everybody liked Bill Hale. He said, Bill Hill and Henry Roan, they were best friends. And I looked around. Between that and hearing Margie Burkott say that they were in love, I said, oh, it's all around the same time, by the way, in one of those visits. And then at one point he told me later on, he said, you don't understand the Osage way. He said, my grandmother, when I was a little kid, we'd be running around and there'd be a big thunderstorm coming. And my grandmother would say, stop you running around, sit down. And I'd say, why, Grandma? And he said, come here, because Wakanda sent this storm, and the storm has power, and it's a gift from Wakanda. Sit and appreciate the gift from Wakanda. And I said, oh, okay. He said, that's the kind of thing, and I just went away and I wrote it down. And put it in the film at the end of the first dinner scene. She wrenches him out of his world and makes him stop and become part of the Osage way of thinking. And he goes with it, He goes with it. So that's just one instance of somebody Wilson was he's a lawyer too, isn't he? I mean, coming by and saying something and say, okay, let's go there. Let's go. That's interesting. Let's go there. The whole idea too of the ancestors coming to take you home is something special too that I've worked on for quite a while. The owl, all of that. We had even more of that stuff, and then we pulled it out of the script. But in any event, the way of working was that, Chris, I think, told you the story of the coyote and the whirlwind. Mm-hmm. And that became their relationship. And maybe you could say a little about that, about the coyote.
I mean, we when he told me this story in our language lessons, vetted it, asked everybody if it was an okay thing to share and kind of base, because community stories, you don't want to put them in a movie for everybody. They belong to the community, but this is one that people share quite a bit. But more or less, when Molly calls Ernest Shomigasi, she's not just hearkening to the animal coyote. The coyote is one of the Osage trickster figures, so she's calling him a trickster. And coyote, and there was a whole other trickster figure that was kind of applied, that was never surfaced in our film, but was in the subtext. For Hale was raccoon. Raccoon is the evil one. Coyote's the fop. Coyote's the fun-loving one. It's the one that, it's the one that felt the closest to Blackfeet, our trickster figure that I was raised. Some of the stories are almost identical, but our trickster figure in our language translates to the same word, or the same root word as white man. I mean, our trickster figure came first and the word for white man came later. But there's that duplicity, that nature of friend and foe. But our trickster figure is very self-serving, very hedonistic, and never ultimately really wins. Screws up things for everybody else along the way, but isn't really the victor in the story. So that clicked for me. It's that's the blind spot that Ernest can hide in from Molly. If she from the jump labels him as a trickster and has his number, knows what he's about, but feels like she's got it handled because she was raised with these stories. She was raised knowing this type, which is highly entertaining. And I mean, it's a dynamic that exists in my family. This larger than life, self, hedonistic cowboy type who just lives to make his self-possessed, graceful, stoic Indian woman laugh. It's that dynamic is a very real one. And it really felt like that story. And suddenly the arc of the story made sense to me in a different way too. Because, and I joked with Marty a couple of times that people have been trying so hard to call this film a Western. And understandably, but to me, it's the genre that makes most sense to me is it's a trickster story. It's a trickster noir. Because at the end of a trickster story, by calling Ernest Shomigasi again at the end, when she's been the one who's burned, her whole community's been the one who's burned because he just hasn't learned his fucking lesson. Excuse my language. But then that made sense to me that Molly was a character in the way that we told it, of this broader trickster narrative. And she got burned by him. Her community got burned by him. So yeah, and that kind of really, it helped us find our dynamic. I know that it helped you with some character choices early on. It helped with some of, honestly, just some of the small things that were in the original script written in English to be translated into Osage that didn't translate. Like there was a line Molly had where she was talking with her sisters. The four of us sat down together and kind of rewrote our lines for that scene so that they would be easier to translate, but also we could bring our personalities into it more. But it was kind of that re-brainstorming session that the four of us had was based off of changing one line that Chris Cote couldn't translate, which was Molly was saying Ernest had these devil blue eyes. He's like, there's no way to say that in Osage. But then at that point it was like, well, coyotes have those light eyes. Coyotes have that going on, and that accomplishes everything that text was saying. We found a way to bring that line back later when we were kind of in the car and in that flirtatious scene. The handsome devil line was a way of reviving that and bringing that concept back. But
well, speaking of the handsome devil, Leo, you still didn't answer whether you believe that Ernest really loved Molly. Based on
I saw one piece of footage from him. I want to answer that, but I do want to add to what you were saying earlier about what we took from those initial Osage meetings about the story. And I do want to say that David Grann's book was so incredibly detailed. He went in there forensically to really study the history. And but the thing that I think we felt most of all was the role of the Osage in bringing the attention of what was going on to the government. It was them that were the catalysts. I think the original book has a lot to do with the onset of the FBI, the forensics of all that, how they solved this case, and in a lot of ways that was used as a propaganda tool in films like the FBI Story with Jimmy Stewart to showcase the great efforts of the FBI. But Molly and the Osage were really the heroes in this story. They were the ones that, after years and years of the FBI ignoring these murders, even though Native American territory is under their jurisdiction, she was the one that went to Washington. The Osage were the ones that were, pleading and finally got these murders solved. So I think that really shifted our story in a major way. Now, do I think that he loved her? That's a very complicated question. I saw video footage of him. We read all the documents, all the court transcriptions. There was one moment of him in his late 90s where his family is asking him about her. And, he basically said, she was a good one. She was a good one, which we used in the movie. Do I believe that, what is love? Do you think that somebody could simultaneously poison his own wife and be a part of destroying her entire bloodline, and you can call that love? I would argue no. But do I believe that he did care for this woman and that they did have a very deep and real relationship? Yes.
Yeah. So that's the thing. It's the amount that we could talk about this for a long time is the element of delusion and thinking that, oh, Uncle Bill will never let it go that far. It'll never affect me or Molly by the time, it'll work itself out. It's not going to get that crazy. I'm just saying, that's the kind of thing we talked about every day. So what you get here is a glimpse of how we pull the whole story together daily as we're making the film, you see.
Well, I have so many questions I still have to ask, but Marty, you've made cameos in quite a number of your films.
Oh my God, I made it, yes. Yeah.
Well, I was going to say that this appearance carries a lot more weight because you are recounting Molly Burkhart's obituary. Why was this such an important role for you specifically?
By that time, when I had this idea of the radio show with Eric Roth, we were way from the beginning, first working on the script. And by the time we shot the movie, anyway, the radio show was shot about 2 months later. in New York, actually. And by that time, because the radio show was a very thin line, it's a very tricky thing to pull off in that it can be farcical, but at the same time, it's based on real radio shows of the period. The FBI story, not the FBI story, but there were gangbusters and things like that that promoted the FBI. The scripts do exist. And so we had to arrive at the thin line there, but primarily, by the time the obituaries to be read, I didn't know how to direct it. And so I thought, I didn't know who to cast or who could do it. I didn't really understand anymore. And I felt that I was so invested in the story. I said, what if I try it? And if it isn't right, at least I have something and I could reshoot it. It's a medium shot, I can't get an actor with Grant. But the thing was that somehow, it's a very kind of strange thing about this particular film, that somehow living the movie for so long, especially living in Oklahoma and being there every day and being with the Osage and all that, something affected me, I guess, and it came out in the sort of recitation, in a way, of this obituary. And there was, my wife was there, Helen, and my daughters, my daughter Domenica, and my granddaughter there, also in the audience, and there I was talking about all the graves that I had seen, and suddenly, a lot of, I think, my own, I feel for myself, my own culpability in terms of being who I am and the cultures I come from, or seem to come from, and the entertainment over the years that I've admired and still do, that I have to bear some of the responsibility. And so something happened on stage when we did that, and so I left it in.
It was really powerful, and all of you for spending the Friday night, and I once again just want to congratulate you on creating such a brilliant and illuminating film that highlights this varied, essential, and vital aspect of American history. So thank you so much. It's in theaters now, and it will be streaming on Apple starting on January 12th. So everyone have a lovely, lovely week. Thank you.